Can't hear Mark what you're saying. Mark, I think we are not getting you clearly. So I'm going to have to ask someone else to contribute. I think our connection is not that good. Okay, like what I was saying, a buffer is a substance. Oh, Rosemary. Rosemary, please.
What I think a buffer is a solution that resists, it resists changes like an acid or base is added to it. It resists changes in pH when an acid or base is added to it.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. There was another hand up. It was Nexus, I think. What do you have to say?
May I say that a buffer is a solution that resists in change in pH when a small amount of an acid or alkali is added to it. I'm like, a buffer is a solution that resists any change in pH when a solution of an acid or an alkali is added to it. Data wange aweddeko storage nga avudde.
I had been cut off by network. I'm going to request to be given the rights again to be able to share my screen. Last turn, I think it was last turn, I had handed over the rights to. I'm unable to display my screen because I am no longer the host. Okay, I think we shall look at. Okay, so I was still telling you what a buffer is. It is not necessarily a solution. It is a substance, and usually they are proteins that resists changes in pH when small amounts of acids or bases are added to it. So why is that important? Of course, it's important to ensure that there is a stable internal environment. Okay? Yeah, now those who are annotating, please stop it. You're disrupting the lesson. And so that is what a buffer is. So you find that when the homeostasis happens, we are creating that buffering action that resists changes or offsets those changes in the internal environment. So for instance, things like temperature, Humidity, of course, this would be outside the body now. Nutrient availability, probably also outside the body. These keep changing, okay? But the organism is able to still thrive. Now we are going to concern ourselves with mostly the conditions inside the body that keep fluctuating, okay? So we shall look at those. So these are the factors that must be kept constant. Can we mention what those factors are? I have a list here, but I want to hear from you before I share the list I have. Rosemary?
Yeah,
Then Brian?
Nitrogenous wastes.
The nitrogenous waste must be kept constant. Is that what you're saying?
Sir, the concentration of glucose.
Okay, concentration of glucose. Nexus.
The temperature of the body.
The temperature of the body. Monica.
Osmotic pressure.
Osmotic pressure. Ozzy. Rika Ozzy. Okay. So thank you for your contributions, Brian. Lastly, Brian.
The concentration of carbon dioxide.
Okay. Yeah, so glucose concentration, we need to maintain it at around 90 milligrams per 100 cubic centimeters of blood. Okay, someone mentioned that. So that is our set point. Then the average core body temperature should be maintained at around 37 degrees Celsius. Then we have the blood pH. I don't think anyone mentioned blood pH. That one should be around 7.4. 7.4 means that it is slightly above neutral. Yeah. We are getting feedback from Ozzy, slightly above neutral. So it should be below neutral. It should not be below neutral, and neither should it be very far above neutral. So it's 7.4. And then we also have blood pressure, the brachial artery. That one should range near 120/80. We have what we call the systolic and the diastolic pressures. Okay, that's why you get those values. And then we have the blood ionic levels or the electrolyte levels. Electrolytes are those ions in the blood. And the very important electrolytes in this case are sodium ions, potassium ions, chloride ions, calcium ions. As we know, the body requires this from time to time. Can we remind ourselves the importance of these listed electrolytes in our body? At least two importances of these listed electrolytes in our bodies. Then we'll appreciate why they must be kept constant. What's the importance of these electrolytes? Can we have some contributions? Anyone? Okay, if you can remember, Dr. Pretty, yes?
Yeah, I think sodium and potassium is mainly for coordination, like maintaining the nerves maybe at resting potential. And the calcium, I think, can be used for absorption. It enables absorption of iron. Then chlorine chlorine ions, I think they're used for during what? During transportation of carbon dioxide. To remember very well. It's what I remember.
Okay, Dr. Pretty, thank you. So the sodium ions, okay, Adrian?
I just wanted to bring out Dr. Pretty's, I want to bring out Dr. Pretty's point on sodium and potassium. I think she's
Yeah.
trying to imply that sodium and potassium is mainly involved in hyperpolarization. This enables the impulse of the transmission of nerve impulses. That's my idea on it.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. So basically what we see as sodium, potassium are important in coordination. When we see the resting potential, so in the resting potential, the sodium, potassium ions are being actively pumped. The sodium are being pumped out, the potassium are being pumped in. And then, of course, when there's depolarization, then there's an influx of the sodium ions inwards and the potassium ions out, that kind of thing. So it brings about conduction of an impulse. Of course, Adrian has talked about hyperpolarization. So when you go through all those details, you see the real importance of sodium, potassium ions. And then, of course, chloride ions, like Pretty said, in transportation of carbon dioxide by the red blood cells. But also, when you consider how HCl is manufactured by those glands in the gastric pit, you'll find that it's also important there. Now, for calcium, it's not about iron absorption. Calcium is going to be used in blood clotting, but calcium will also be important in muscle contraction. Okay, and calcium, of course, is important in bone formation, teeth formation, and many other areas of the blood, rather of the body. So you can clearly see that these ions need to be maintained, because if they are not, then some of these functions I'm sorry, this network seems to be terrible, but we shall hang in there until we finish. I need to be able to share my screen. All right, so I hope we can now see the screen. So the other thing that needs to be controlled, as I was saying, was oxygen, and then the osmotic pressure. Someone also talked about that already. So osmotic pressure is a factor of salt and water balance. So if you have excess salts, then you have less water. If you have excess water, then you have little salts. So there has to be a balance. As you can remember, if there's excess salt retained in the blood, then it's going to cause issues. you're going to have the cells being damaged by the excess salts, but also the blood, there will be water retained, a lot of water being retained in the body, which can cause hemolysis and so on and so forth. But if you have little salts present, then also you're going to have issues. Now, there's another thing that we need to concern ourselves with. Maybe I could hide it temporarily. That is, for every homeostatic system, there are certain components that it must have for it to function effectively and efficiently. There are 5 components that make up a good homeostatic system or a good control system. What are these 5 components that make a good homeostatic system? What are these 5 components? Because in our objectives, we must know them, and they can be asked, and they have been asked before. Yes, Monica.
And detectors.
So one of them is the detector. Number 2, Brian.
Stimulus.
Stimulus, or what we call the input. Then Laston. Laston, it's your turn.
Receptors.
There must be a receptor. Receptor.
Receptors.
Another name for receptor is the detector. Rosemary.
Oh,
We have also the motor neuron or sensory neuron.
I cannot hear what you're saying.
Afferent and efferent.
Rosemary, I think you have this mixed up with something else.
I'm saying afferent and efferent, like, okay, sensory neurons and motor neurons.
Okay, thank you for your contribution.
How
You
about
are
detectors?
very limited. You're concerning yourself with nervous coordination, and this is a bit beyond that. Adrian.
How about effectors?
Yeah, effectors is correct. Okay, effectors is correct. So we have mentioned, I think, 4 things. There is something that has been left out, Brenda. Brenda, please unmute.
Can I talk about the control center?
Yes, the control center. What is within that control center?
The regulators.
The regulator, there's something about it that makes it a control center. What is it on to make, what is it there that makes us call it a regulator or a control center? There must be something specific. Your answer is correct, but there's something small missing in it.
Okay, I'm not sure then.
Nexus can help us on this. Okay, Brian.
So I think it is the brain.
The brain. Yeah, the brain serves as a control, but there is something special about the brain that makes it function well as a control. But what would that be? Okay, I think let me chip in on this. So this is the table I have. These are the components. So we have the receptors, as one of you mentioned, which can also be called the detectors. I encourage us to understand the words, then we can always figure them out. So to receive means you are going to be able to get a stimulus. So stimuli are detected by receptors. So that's why we also call them detectors. Okay. And then we have what we call the control center. So the control center has what we call as a reference point or the set point. Okay. And then we have the effector. The effector is the organ that is going to seek to bring a correction to what has deviated. Okay. It makes the changes. So these effectors, yes, may be nervous, they may be neurons, okay? They may be connected by neurons. They are not usually neurons, they are organs, but they may be connected by neurons to neurons. And then, of course, you have the reference point or the set point. Then we have the feedback loop. So these are the important components for our system. So we have the receptor, the detectors, the control center, within which we have the set point, then we have the effectors, and then we have the reference point, of course, and then the feedback, not necessarily negative, but the feedback loop. So the explanations for each one of these is on the table, as you can see. So the receptors or detectors are constantly, this word is very important, they are constantly monitoring. They are not doing it on part-time. They are on constant monitoring or surveillance, if you may use that word. And they are supposed to observe or detect, and this is the word detect, changes from a reference point. So it means, like we saw for glucose, there is the normal or the reference point. Now, if you have no normal, then you cannot know that you have deviated. There must be a normal or a set point. And the deviation could be positive or negative. The deviation could mean that you have gone higher than normal blood sugar or lower than normal blood sugar. The deviation could be that you have gone higher than the normal body temperature or you are lower than the normal body temperature. So those deviations are detected by special kind of detectors. These detectors could be nervous in nature. Okay. For instance, we are able to detect the change in environmental temperature because our skin has thermoreceptors. So the skin the skin has thermoreceptors that will tell that the environment around you is changing, and therefore this information is sent to a control center. And the control center is going to now use this information to cause a necessary correction or corrective measure so that the deviation does not affect the body, okay? That deviation does not change how the body functions. For instance, if the external environment became hotter, then those thermoreceptors are going to send an impulse to the brain. Now, in the brain, there is a part that detects changes in the temperature. And now, when that part is stimulated, it's going to send another impulse, okay, to the relevant organs. For this case, the relevant organ is part of the skin. There are some organs in the skin, like the ones that control the erector pili muscles. So the erector pili muscles could be stimulated for them to contract. And if they contracted, it means that the hairs on the skin are going to stand so that a layer of air is trapped. So that the body is insulated from excess heat loss. Now, of course, that would happen if the external temperature falls far below that of the body. And so that is one of the ways. Of course, you'll have other mechanisms that result in less secretion of sweat, and then goose flesh or goose bumps, as people call them, and many other things. Okay, so you can see that all this is happening because there is a detector. Now, if the detector fails to function, that means that your body is in trouble. And if the detector is able to function, but the control center is not functioning, then the body is equally in trouble. And then if the control center functions, but the effectors are malfunctioning, still the body is in trouble. So you can see that the body requires all of this to be working well. Then, of course, we need a reference point for everything to work out. Now, the way all this works out is what we call the feedback loop. Now, the feedback loop is either nervous or hormonal in nature. So the feedback loop can be orchestrated or under the control of the hormonal system, or it may be under the control of the nervous system, or it may involve both nervous and hormonal systems. Okay? Yeah, so it's very, very important. Someone is asking a stimulus, is it correct? Now, the stimulus is what the receptor or the detector will be able to perceive or to cause it to function. So if there's no stimulus, then of course everything here doesn't work. If you have no thermoreceptors, then you cannot detect anything. Or if the body temperature, the external temperature remains constant, then there's no stimulation. Okay? I don't know if you kind of understand what I'm trying to put here. So basically, that is how this whole thing works. Then one of the objectives, we are required to discuss the role of negative feedback mechanism in homeostasis. And I'm glad at the beginning, I don't know, I think it was Monica, who gave us the difference between a negative feedback and positive feedback. Now, you will find that negative feedback is something that occurs more regularly than say positive feedback. But both loops are present in our bodies and they all serve a particular purpose. So you cannot do away with any one of them. They all have a role to play, and that role cannot be underestimated. So here we are required to talk about this negative feedback loop. So why do we think that the negative feedback loop is important? What would happen, for instance, if we only had a positive feedback loop? Or what would happen if we had only a negative feedback loops and no situations where a positive feedback loop is operational in the body? Can I have some contributions to this effect? Anyone? Okay, Rosemary.
Okay, for me, what I think, since the negative feedback for it, it induces a corrective mechanism to restore it back to the norm, and the positive one for it, it just induces a further deviation like away from the norm. So I think the negative feedback for it, it helps like to correct the deviation back to the norm.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. So in other words, the negative feedback brings back stability. Okay, it increases the stability of a system, because if a system is on positive feedback, it means it becomes more and more unstable, which can be dangerous. As we already started the lesson, we saw that if, for instance, the temperatures keep rising, it's going to result into denaturation of enzymes since they are protein. Or if it keeps falling, it's going to cause inactivation of enzymes, and that doesn't work for a stable system. So it brings about stability. Okay. Let's see what I have for you. But before we do that, okay, I've defined a feedback loop here. Okay. A mechanism in which an input stimulus causes an output, and the response is what we call the feedback. Okay. What we had initially. So we said there are two kinds. The negative feedback. So if you're answering this question, it's important you define what negative feedback is. You may not have put all the things I have put already because some of them are just for discussion's sake, but you'd start by defining what a negative feedback is. So a mechanism in which the effect of the deviation from the normal conditions triggers a response that eliminates its deviation or restores the conditions to the normal. Okay. So in order to reduce further corrective action of the control system once the set point has been reached. So it means that we have a time when the system stops doing the correction. For instance, if your blood sugar levels were to rise above 150, okay, because the normal is 90, but at times you find that people are operating slightly above 90. That still is safe, maybe 100, depending on the circumstances, of course. Now, if it goes above 150, that is alarming. Now, something needs to be done. Of course, usually after you had a meal, the blood sugar levels normally rise above the normal, but only for a short time, and then corrective measures are put in place. But now the corrective measures should not be such that they cause the blood sugar levels to now fall below 90. So when we strike the 90 mark, then the corrective measure stops. For instance, we know that when we have taken a meal, the blood sugar levels rise above 90, maybe they are 150 or 120. So that excess glucose must be converted to glycogen and stored away. But some of it is used in respiration. Some of it may be converted into lipids and stored in the adipose tissue. Now, if we keep drawing more and more glucose out of the system and it falls below 90, then we must again put in another mechanism because now we have gone below the set point. So what happens is that when we reach 90, then the process of glycogenesis rather, will stop because we don't need to reduce the sugar levels any further. So that's what we are having here, that reduced further corrective action of the control system once the set point has been reached. So we don't keep on correcting without any end in mind. Then we have examples, of course, examples of negative feedback. I've already mentioned two of them: the blood sugar concentration, how it is controlled, the temperature, how it is controlled, the pH, how it is controlled, and many others. Okay, and many others. Now, how this negative feedback operates is what we are going to discuss. So one of them, when you're answering that question now, you're going to talk about, because it's a discussion question, so you're going to clearly show us how the whole thing works. Yes, Nexus. Okay, so you're going to talk about how the whole negative feedback works. It starts first of all by detection of a deviation. So when there is a deviation, the sensor or the detector will detect the change in that variable. Now the variables, we mentioned them already. And then this sensor will continuously monitor the condition. So it doesn't detect and make an alarm and then stop at that, okay? I would like to use the example of a dog. The dog will bark and bark until the owner comes and does something. If the dog has seen a snake, it will keep barking until the owner comes and kills the snake, or the owner comes and sees who is at the door. If the owner doesn't come, the dog will bark, you see. But if the owner comes and talks nicely to the person, then the dog will know that this person is friendly, they are not a hostile person, so they will have to keep quiet. Okay, so that is something very important. Then we also have the transmission of the signal. So the receptor detects that deviation from the set point. It sends us a signal to the control center, which is usually the brain or an endocrine organ. And then that information is processed, and then the appropriate response is determined. And then the response is now activated. So the control center now triggers an effector or a group of effectors to cause a response. So the effector, in this case, might be a muscle, might be a gland, or other organs that are responsible for correcting the deviation. Then we also see that the restoration of homeostasis. Now it means that things have gone back to normal, okay? So this response from the effector is supposed to counter the change and bring about conditions that are back to normal. So if, for instance, the body temperature rises, maybe you've been doing exercise, or you've been doing exercise. Now, the body temperature will, of course, rise because of the increased metabolic rate that is trying to generate energy for you to do the exercise. Now, of course, when the body heats up, then the excess heat must be eliminated. And so there must be mechanisms to ensure that the heat is lost as fast as possible. So for instance, the sweat glands will be activated and a lot of sweat is produced. Of course, you know from your chemicals of life that water has a very high heat of vaporization, latent heat of vaporization. So for a little amount of water, much heat is lost. And so when the sweat glands are stimulated, then a lot of heat is lost as sweat is taking place and causing the body now to feel cool. Of course, if it was the opposite and the temperatures have dropped, it means for the sweat glands to remain active, then there's going to be a lot of heat loss as sweat is being produced. So we cannot afford to lose more heat than the environment. Okay? Remember, whenever we have a body in the environment, there will be heat transfer from the body to the environment. If the body is at a higher temperature than the environment, or if the environment is at a higher temperature than the body, then the body will will be able to absorb more heat. So there will always be heat transfer as long as there's a temperature difference. So if there's a temperature difference, the body must find a way of ensuring that that temperature difference does not cause the body to malfunction. That temperature difference must be dealt with in such a way that the core body temperature remains more or less the same. So that's why you see when the external temperature goes down, then the body will respond by generating some heat through those involuntary muscle contractions, what we call shivering. Or you'll see the hairs on the body standing if it's a mammal, so that we can trap more heat, okay, and so on and so forth. So that is that. And then lastly, the feedback to the control center. Here we see the effectors carry out their functions. The sensors continue to monitor the condition. And once the condition returns to the desired range, then the control center can reduce or stop the response, so that we don't have an overcorrection, as I had mentioned earlier. Someone is asking, what is the core temperature? The core temperature is basically the temperature of your torso. The torso is your thorax and abdomen combined. You find that that is the part of the body that generates heat, because we have the liver. The liver carries out several metabolic functions or metabolic processes that generate heat, and they are responsible for the heat that circulates in your body. So if the core temperature drops further below the set point, then we are in trouble, because you could suffer from hypothermia. Hypothermia is basically when someone's body temperature has fallen far below the core body temperature, and there's a risk of them being at the same temperature as the environment. Remember, when you have the same body temperature, when the body temperature rather is the same as that of the environment, then there's no heat transfer. So dead bodies, corpses, they always have a very low temperature similar to that of the environment, okay? Because there's no mechanism of generating heat that will keep it above. So that is hypothermia. Hyperthermia is where now the heat inside the body goes way beyond what is normal, and eventually the whole system crashes. Now, someone is asking, what's the effect of adrenaline on carbohydrate metabolism? I pose this to the question, to the class again. What is the effect of adrenaline on carbohydrate metabolism? What do we have to say on that? The effects of adrenaline on carbohydrate metabolism. If the body secretes adrenaline, how does that affect how carbohydrates are metabolized? Any ideas? Yes, watch a mark.
The production.
Watch a mark, please. Try to change your location.
Increases the carbohydrate. This is because there is increased carbohydrate metabolism. This is because there are different effects that adrenaline causes. We can see in birds, it can cause flight, or it can cause frightening. So this will require enough energy for an organism to react. So there's increased carbohydrate metabolism.
Okay, thank you, Wacha. Do we have any other contribution? So Dr. Pretty says it increases. I think the question here requires us to tell more than saying it increases, as what I was trying to explain. So when adrenaline increases, or when adrenaline is in the body, it's going to trigger certain metabolic processes that revolve around the use of carbohydrates. That's why I call it carbohydrate metabolism. So it's going to cause the breakdown of glycogen into glucose. Remember that when we have excess glucose, the excess glucose is converted into glycogen and stored in the liver and in the muscle tissues. So what happens is that that excess glucose is stored for later use. It's going to be used when the need arises. You're going to find a situation like what he's talked about, fight or flight. If one is scared, there's need to marshal or to generate as much energy in such a short time as possible. So it's not a time to go about eating and getting the energy. By the time digestion takes place and then respiration, probably the person will be long dead because of the situation requires an immediate response. So the body always stores some of that glucose in form of maybe fats, okay, or in form of glycogen. So we are going to have the process of glycogenolysis, okay, whereby glycogen is being broken down to release the glucose, which is going to be respired to generate the energy. But we have gluconeogenesis. Now, even other non-carbohydrate sources are going to be used, okay? They are going to be used to generate energy, okay? Then we could have glycolysis, where we have anaerobic respiration to generate energy, okay? And then the conversion of glucose into glycogen will be inhibited because it will be counteracting or countermeasure to what we are trying to do. We are trying to generate a lot of glucose for respiration, and then this process is trying to take away the glucose and converting it into glycogen. So those are the effects that you need to talk about, but explain them, explain the basis, why that is happening, okay? Yeah. So someone is asking if a generation of energy is immediate, don't you think lactic acid production would be, let me see, see the word Burunji. Lactic acid production would then be stimulated. Well, lactic acid comes from anaerobic respiration. It starts with trying to generate energy without oxygen from glucose. So if there's not enough oxygen, the body resorts to anaerobic respiration, and definitely lactic acid will be produced. And lactic acid, in this case, is a waste product of that process. So lactic acid will be broken down into something else if now the person is trying to pay the oxygen debt, okay? But before they pay the oxygen debt, the lactic acid is a nuisance. It's not really something that is going to be helpful. It's going to instead cause muscle cramps and muscle fatigue. Okay, I think we can carry on. So here is a diagrammatic representation of all the things we have been talking about with a specific reference to the temperature regulation. So if you can't see here, this horizontal bar shows us the normal body temperature, which should range between 35.6 and 37.8. This is what we call the set point. So if you are somewhere in between or on the boundary, you're still safe. But the problem is if you go above or below this range, as you can see, it is a narrow range, then that's where trouble may arise. Now, assuming that you have an imbalance whereby you have been exercising or you are living in the tropics like Uganda, where the external temperature is very hot, above that of your body. So your body is tending to get heated up because it's absorbing heat from the environment, which is above that of the body. Then when the blood is flowing near the surface of your skin, like your arms, your legs, the blood is going to become warmer. Okay, and as this blood circulates, it goes to the hypothalamus. Now, in the hypothalamus, the blood will be detected to be warmer than normal. That's above the set point. Then the hypothalamus is going to send impulses, which are going to go to a number of places. One of them is going to be the blood vessels near the skin, okay, the capillary network near the skin, and also the sweat glands. So the blood vessels near the skin are going to become dilated. That means they are going to increase in their diameter. And that means now more and more blood is flowing through these blood vessels than was flowing there before. So if a large volume of blood is flowing close to these blood vessels, it's going to mean that more and more heat is being radiated from the skin to the surface, okay? And then the sweat glands will become more activated, so they are going to increase the rate of sweating, or what we call perspiration. And of course, as the water is evaporating off your skin, it cools it. And then this will cause the body temperature to decrease, and then the blood temperature also decreases. And now, as the blood flows close to the hypothalamus, it will be able to detect that now the temperature is back to normal. Yes, Laston.
I'm requesting to pardon, please.
Pardon on what?
That very process.
You want me to begin from the start? I'll go to the start once again. Okay, you may mute. All right. So what happens is that we start from what is the set point or the reference point. So the set point for human bodies is between 35.6 and 37.8. So normal people need to have a body temperature that is somewhere in between. So when you go to the hospital and they take your temperature reading, if it is anywhere there, it's not any cause for alarm. But if you have a fever, then your body temperature, your core body temperature tends to rise above that. And that is the first indicator that there is something not right with your body. So, but even if you don't have a fever, if you are doing exercise, like you're running, doing road work, or you're playing football, or you are doing some vigorous activity at home, maybe you're ferrying water from one place to another, carrying food, or whatever kind of work you're doing, if you're exerting yourself, then it means that you're generating a lot of heat because the body has increased its rate of metabolism. But you may also be walking about and the external temperature is very high, like is common for us who are in the tropics. So you find that there's a tendency for your body to absorb much heat from the environment. And when it does that, then the blood that is flowing close to the skin is going to flow to the brain, particularly the hypothalamus, which has thermocenters. It has those special areas which detect any change in the blood temperature. So when that is detected, the hypothalamus is going to send nerve impulses to the sweat glands. It's going to send them to the blood capillary network, which is close to the skin, what we call the periphery blood, okay? Now, blood circulation. So then they will become dilated. The capillaries are dilated. Once dilated, it means that now more blood is flowing through them because their diameter has increased. So the more blood flows through the capillaries, it means the more heat that is lost by radiation to the environment. And of course, if the sweat glands are activated, it means more water is lost through the sweat. And as water is evaporating from the sweat, then cooling is happening. And of course, while all that is happening, the detector keeps its work of monitoring whether we have achieved the reference point or the set point. And once the set point has been achieved, then you'll notice the sweating will reduce, and also the blood capillary network will constrict, go back to normal. And then the whole heat loss center will be shut off, okay? And the whole heat loss center is what we find in the hypothalamus. Now, what if we have the opposite? If we have an environment which is very cold, like we have a rainy day and the environment becomes so cold. So if the environment becomes so cold, there's a risk of excess heat being lost from the body, and that should not happen. And so now the opposite happens. Okay, it means now the sweat glands can't be stimulated because that will not help. Instead, now we are going to stimulate the muscles, the skeletal muscles. You must always add the word skeletal because we have cardiac muscles and we have smooth muscles. And these are not going to be affected by this. Because what happens, there will be shivering, and then there will be constriction of the blood capillaries. Now, when there's constriction of blood capillaries, less blood flows through them, and means less heat is lost to the environment. So more heat is conserved by the body, and therefore it means now the body temperature starts rising once again until it reaches the normal. And once it reaches the normal, then the part of the hypothalamus that promotes that shuts down the loss of heat will be stimulated, and then we shall have things going back to normal. So I think that is helps us to clarify what negative feedback is. So these are two negative feedback loops. One is nervous and the other one is endocrine. So remember I told you negative feedback may happen using the nervous pathway or the endocrine pathway. But in all of them, you can see the components we talked about, okay? So when we have a stimulus, then the receptor will detect that stimulus, then the receptor will send an impulse, or it will send a message to the control center. Then the control center will send an impulse or a message to the effector. Then the effector will bring about a corrective measure, and then we have that feedback. Okay, so basically this is what happens. Now for the hormonal or the endocrine system, we are using osmoregulation example. Say if the blood levels rise in blood, say you've been taking a lot of drinks, a lot of porridge, a lot of water, okay? And now the osmoreceptors in the brain will be able to detect, okay, that now this gentleman or lady has taken too much water. And there's a risk of having dilution of our salts. So it means that excess water must be removed from the body, okay? So what happens, the osmoregulator in the hypothalamus is going to cause less ADH to be secreted by the pituitary gland, the posterior pituitary lobe. So when less ADH is secreted, it means that now in the nephron, we are going to have the distal convoluted tubule and the loop and the collecting ducts being less permeable to water. So when they are less permeable to water, it means large volumes of water are going to be passed out with the urine. And that means now you're going to go back to the normal water concentration in the blood. Okay? Yeah, so I think that helps us to show the role of hormonal and nervous systems in homeostasis using those examples. Okay, I think we've talked about this. Don't need to labor it anymore. You could just read through. In case there's something that's not clear, then we can discuss that. Yes, Pretty.
Yes, teacher, I was asking, in the negative feedback, for example, when you're talking about temperature regulation, okay, when you say, okay, the control center, now that if it has already acted, like send the impulses to the effectors and everything is back to normal, I was asking, how does, okay, the control center now detect that everything is back to normal, so sending impulses should stop or something like that?
Okay, I hope I've understood your question. So what happens is this. I'm going to use a very simple example, then I'll also use the example in our bodies. If you have been ironing clothes using an electronic flat iron, you will notice that there is a light that keeps coming on and going off. That light is connected to the bimetallic strip. The bimetallic strip is not a system, but it is two pieces of metal that have different thermal expansion properties. So you find that one metal expands faster than the other. Now, when that piece of metal expands, it's going to cause that strip to maybe make contact and complete the circuit. Then you find that the element, that heating part of the flat iron, will become hot. When it becomes very, very hot, then the other piece of metal now is going to expand. Okay? When it expands, it's going to stretch and cause that metallic strip to break away from the contact and break the circuit. So that happens, then that light bulb goes off maybe. And when it goes off, then the flat iron seems to be cooling itself. When it cools itself, now the other piece of metal will now expand where the other one contract, something like that. So you see that there's a measure so that the flat iron doesn't keep heating and burn clothes. So that bimetallic strip helps to control the flat iron from burning people's clothes. Now, coming back to your example, you're going to find that, like I gave the example of thermoregulation or temperature regulation. The key point here is that there are receptors in your skin that are detecting the temperature of your body and comparing it with that of the environment around you. Okay? So you're going to find that these thermoreceptors are always able to notice that the blood flowing close to your skin is either hotter or colder, okay, than the set point, or is at the normal required temperature. So you find that if it is cold outside, you usually notice that your skin becomes a bit chilly. When you feel that kind of chilliness, or you feel like your skin is a bit shivery, when there's a breeze flowing close to your skin. So it means that the heat from the environment, or the coldness from the environment, is causing that blood to become slightly colder than the normal temperature of your core temperature. And so it flows to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus will say, hey, so this is the temperature of the environment. So when the hypothalamus realizes that the temperature of the environment is cool, it means that, hey, if we don't do anything, then we are going to now start losing heat. So when that happens, then the hypothalamus will send an impulse to correct that, to ensure that now less heat is lost through maybe shivering, or through maybe hair standing, or you feel the urge to put on a sweater. Okay. Now what happens is that once you get back to normal, still the same blood will flow to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus will realize, oh, now the blood is at the normal temperature. So the hypothalamus will now fire less, or stop firing impulses to those body organs, and that correction will be stopped. So that correction measure will be stopped because it's no longer necessary. I hope that answers your question pretty. So that means that the detector must be working 24/7. Even when you are asleep, it is working. The other day I was reading about what ensures that people sleep well. So if you are when you're asleep, the temperature of your skin, okay, sort of goes down, okay? Because someone was trying to explain that the temperature in your room affects the quality of sleep you have. If the temperature in the room is too high, then you feel discomfort and you will not sleep. But if the temperature drops, then you will feel the sleepiness will be there, because it will be comfortable for the body. You get it? Something like that. And of course, we're explaining other things like the amount of light in the room. If there's too much light, then you don't sleep well. You have less sleep quality. If there's little light, then your sleep quality increases. Yes, Brian?
So may I have my question here that explain why positive feedback mechanisms are not common in biological systems?
Yes, so why are positive feedback mechanisms not common? So what would we say here? You can look at the advantage of negative feedback now, okay? And look at the disadvantage of positive feedback. Remember, positive feedback tends to cause the systems become more unstable, okay?
Yes.
And so that is why they are not really that common, okay? They are not that common. And for example, and we think of examples of positive feedback. I think we didn't talk about those, but it's important at this point for us to talk about them. Positive feedback. If you have learned about reproduction, you would know some of those examples of positive feedback, especially among women who are lactating, and also childbirth, okay, or what we call labor. There is, yes, Dr. Pretty, childbirth. There is positive feedback. Positive feedback helps in ensuring that those muscles of the cervix dilate, okay? They dilate so that the baby comes out, okay? And then positive feedback occurs during lactation. The more a mother breastfeeds, the more the mammary glands are stimulated, produce more and more breast milk, okay? But also positive feedback can be seen in blood clotting, the cascade of events that take place during blood clotting. So it means that when one clotting factor is present, it causes other clotting factors to be added and so on and so forth. When you study the endocrine system, you'll come across those things, and they should be able to help you appreciate that. Yes, oxytocin during childbirth. That's what we're talking about. One is asking, what is a cascade? What is a cascade? So let me try to get a simple dictionary meaning here that will help us to understand a cascade. So a cascade is a biological or chemical signaling pathway, okay? Which, okay, this context doesn't come out well. Let me get cascade in biology. It's like one event worsens. It's like if I say, okay, let me just wait for this to play out, then I'll share. So when talking about a cascade in biology, it refers to a series of biochemical events which might involve enzymes or signaling molecules, where the outcome of one event triggers or amplifies, yeah, this is the key word, amplifying subsequent events in a chain-like sequence, okay? So you find that if, say, the first clotting factor comes, then it will speed up the next and the next and the next. So there's that amplification of subsequent events. So it means that if the first event doesn't happen, then other events won't happen, okay? If one clotting factor is absent, it means that the likelihood of proper blood clotting taking place will not even happen at all. That's why you see people have hemophilia. But there are different types of hemophilia. But what happens is that someone is lacking certain clotting factors, certain essential proteins that are important in the process of blood clotting. So if those proteins are not manufactured by the body, it means the whole process of blood clotting will never occur successfully. And so what they do for such people, they have to take them to hospital and they give them artificial clotting factors so that now the cascade can happen to completion. So you can see what a cascade is. If you had what we call dominoes, dominoes is a game whereby you get like a card and then it falls on another card and another card. And each time it is falling, it's hitting many other cards. And by the time you reach the last card, they all fall down with a big bang or with such a strong force. So if in the process you withdrew one card in the sequence of events, then the whole cascade will not take place. So I hope that helps to answer the question. All right. Let's go to the next. So explain the negative feedback mechanism, how it's related to the endocrine and nervous systems. So this is also one of the objectives that was required of us in their general principles of homeostasis. Remember, I showed you those two loops at some point. Now, the first loop I'm showing you here is the one for the endocrine. So we have a stimulus, which could be a change in physiological condition, like say low blood glucose or high calcium levels in the body. So if we detected that, then there will be a necessary hormone that is released. So this hormone that is released could be released by, say, the pancreas. So remember, the pancreas has the islets of Langerhans, the beta cells and the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans. So the beta cells, remember, secrete insulin, while the alpha ones secrete glucagon. So it means that both cannot be stimulated at the same time. There will have to be the necessary stimulus that will stimulate the right glands or the right cells. So in this case, if we had, say, a drop in the blood sugar levels, then it means that the beta, okay, the alpha cells are those that are going to be stimulated in order to release glucagon, okay? And glucagon will cause certain responses, okay? Like, for example, it's going to cause conversion of fats into glucose. It's going to cause conversion of glycogen into glucose, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is the target response. And then we have the feedback to control the hormone secretion. In other words, the hormone cannot continuously be secreted. There must be an end to this secretion. When do we know this? Now, excess hormone has been secreted or little hormone has been secreted, okay? And we still need more. That's why we talk about the feedback to control hormone secretion. So I think I'd already explained this. I don't need to labor to explain more about them. So that is how the endocrine system functions using the negative feedback. We studied reproduction. It's a very good area, especially hormonal control of secretions in females. It's a good area to understand this negative feedback. When we look at FSH, LH, we look at estrogen, progesterone, how all those interact. Okay, I would encourage you to go back and read on those things. You'll be able to appreciate this. Then we have for the nervous system, it is similar, but in this case, we are just only looking at neurons and nerve impulses. So, but otherwise, we have a similar system. Okay. So here we have receptors, which are usually thermoreceptors, chemoreceptors. Baroreceptors are pressure receptors, if you remember what a barometer is. So these thermoreceptors, chemoreceptors, or baroreceptors are going to detect changes in temperature, oxygen concentration, carbon dioxide concentration, or blood pressure. So once they have detected them, then they are going to cause an impulse to be sent to the brain or spinal cord. In this case, it's usually the spinal cord. So rather the brain. And so when it goes to the brain, then the brain interprets what impulse has been sent, and then it sends a signal or an impulse to the effectors, which in this case could be muscles or glands, to cause a response, okay? And then, of course, when do we know that we have responded adequately and we need now to stop? This is now where the feedback and regulation happens against negative feedback, because in this case, we are going to cause that stimulation to be stopped. If it were positive feedback, it would mean that we continuously allow that stimulation to go on and on and on and on. Of course, the beauty about positive feedback in child labor is that it helps the mother maybe to withstand the pain. Okay, so the body is keeping on being prepared for more pain and more pain and more pain until the process of child labor has fully happened. Okay, something like that. It's just my thoughts. Yeah, so basically, that is that. Then another objective is to identify the main internal and external causes of changes in the internal environment. So the internal environment keeps changing based on what it receives from the external environment or the internal environment. So I see people are starting to get tired, but hang in there, we're about to finish. So here are the internal causes. There could be metabolic processes. Some of these processes could involve cellular respiration, which produces carbon dioxide and produces heat, and maybe some wastes, other wastes, which will change, of course, the internal conditions, and therefore cause a need to cause homeostasis to take place. Then we could also see hormonal fluctuations. Maybe as someone is growing or aging, or someone is going through stress, then the processes of metabolism may be altered somewhat. Like when someone is stressed, there are certain ways the body responds. Some people, when they are stressed, they put on weight. Others, they lose weight. Okay? When they are stressed, the way in which their body reacts, and sometimes because of that, they are easily prone to disease. That's why we need to manage stress. And then we also have other internal factors like the immune response. Like if someone is ill or has an infection, then we may have inflammation. Inflammation is like when you get stung by a bee and then the area where you have been stung becomes swollen, becomes hot, it becomes painful. Those are signs of inflammation, okay? And so the internal environment will have to be impacted, definitely. Kasala?
Master, I have a question.
Yes, please.
As we are setting those factors that affect, they say, oh, yeah, cause changes in internal environment. There are some
I'm
other
sorry?
internal factors.
I am
Some other
not hearing
factors.
you well. Yes, Kasala?
Master, I was asking,
If you're not
I
clear,
was
you can type
asking,
a question. Okay, that's better.
I was asking that what of those internal factors that are influenced by some other external factors, such as metabolism, we have to state them as separate, or we combine them and we give them as one?
Now, when you're answering that question, you can start by talking about only internal factors, then external factors for purposes of you being organized. So the ones I'm giving you are only internal factors, things that happen within the body that you have fairly little control over. But then we have external factors, as I'm going to share with them as I'm closing. Okay. For them, you might have a control over them, but they have an impact on your on the homeostasis. So internal factors, we have genetic variability. You may find that some people are more prone to disease than others. Some people are able to do certain things. Maybe some people are able to digest lactose, others don't. And because they can't digest lactose, they are lactose intolerant, Whenever they drink milk, it sort of destabilizes their whole body. While others will drink it normally and it's not a problem. Yes, Akasala. Okay, let's carry on. Then we have the environmental temperature for the external factors, the nutrition and diet. Okay, if you take in certain nutrients that alter the blood glucose levels, like some people who are diabetic, it will cause problems for them. Exercise and physical activity, when you exercise, it will cause maybe your heart rate to become faster, your breathing rate, and then it will affect your amount of glucose and the oxygen and so on and so forth. So stress, the environment in which you are may cause stress to you, okay? And it may cause some problems to your homeostasis. If you're exposed to pathogens or toxins, it can also cause problems. So in brief, that's what I wanted to share with you. I think we will stop here and then we'll call it a day. There are some questions, I've entertained them, and then before we call off the lesson, we finish the lesson, sorry. Okay, so if there are no questions, we'll stop here.